said, "Hey, maybe you should start watching John Wick."
Yeah, and I took your advice to heart because I'm like, you know what, I have these films. I should probably get on and actually watch it. And I did. I sat down and I watched both films, John Wick 1 and 2. I like him. I can see why people really have kind of come on and like kind of revolved around these films because it definitely is something that has a lot of spectacle in it. The one thing I will say is I think John Wick 1 is a better movie than John Wick 2, and I think part of it has to do with the fact that maybe when they made John Wick, they weren't particularly expecting it to spin off into a big franchise. That's at least the feel that I have watching the film, that like it doesn't scream out, yes, we are going to make a sequel after the events of or after the end of John Wick 1. But just to kind of give people a little bit of like a summary if you haven't watched it, like me, I came out in 2014. It's essentially about a man who retired from his work to be with his wife, who recently dies and leaves him a puppy to take care of. Subsequently, he gets into a bit of an altercation with some gangsters who then break into his house, beat him up, and kill his dog. And it gets revealed that he's actually an ex-assassin and one of the biggest ex-assassins that everybody kind of knows about, who had left the game, but because of the events of these gang members, beating him up and killing his dog, he's kind of gotten back into things. And yeah, it's just a wild ride after that. I really really like the in particular when he kind of goes into the club.
Oh yeah,
Um,
got some memorable music, and it's a good scene as well.
it kind of reminds me of Hotline Miami when I was watching it. Just because for those who don't know, Hotline it's a kind of top down kind of shooter. I think a shooter brawler kind of game, where you kind of have to like go in and prepare your moves and kill your enemies in like a pretty fast and succinct way. And you can kind of get killed after one hit. And yeah, there's a really really cool scene where he's kind of moving along and like he's kind of going up, like trying to find the guy who killed his dog. The thing that I also kind of like is in this movie, there's like a reputation that he has, and everybody kind of respects him for it, but it's not done in a way that's like, for example, in a kind of like a 80s sense, like for example, Shaft, right? Like I don't know if you've ever watched Shaft, but I really like those films and some of the films that have come out. Although I haven't watched the latest Shaft movie that came out, or is coming out. But in that movie, it's almost done like in those movies, it's done kind of in a comedic sense. It's like, oh, it's Shaft. He's the guy who does all this, and it's kind of a bit of a meme, right? Whereas over here in this movie, like he kind of comes up behind somebody at the club, who like knows it's him, and like they used to be friends, and they just have like a casual conversation, and like John Wick's like, how about you take the night off, and he's like, oh, thank you, sir, and he kind of walks off, and then John Wick kind of does his own thing. Like everybody kind of respects
That's
who
I
he
think that's the
is.
general theme of these John Wick films, where John Wick is such an infamous assassin. He's known around the world, and everyone's like, yeah, you don't screw around with him, no matter what you do.
Mm.
And I
Yeah,
think that,
and
and
they did.
I think that's the joke, and I think that's the great thing about um the first movie is it's really good at world building.
Yeah,
And it shows like not
definitely.
only about like the whole mystery of John Wick and why he's just renowned all around the world, to like the Continental and how that works, and like cool things of like the coins and what they represent. And it's like
Mhm.
and I think that's the excellence of the John Wick series, almost, where it does have these connections. And yeah, the first John Wick film is very much kind of like a almost bittersweet type film. And
Mhm.
it blew up. It just absolutely blew up. Like, I'm pretty sure Keanu Reeves was not expecting John Wick to be such a success, especially the way it is now. And I don't think anyone did. Um,
It's really funny because I think he also didn't expect The Matrix to be as big as it was, and I don't think a lot of people at the time, when The Matrix came out, thought it would be like this amazing, like ridiculous film that would develop into this like kind of like cult favoritism, right? And yeah, so I think like that's why like there was an interview Keanu did where like I think it was like for Playboy, and he said something along the lines of, yeah, there are people like I just want to let people know like I'm not a messiah, I'm not like Jesus, like I'm not like the second coming, because a lot of people apparently were probably harassing him about that kind of stuff when they watched the film. It was a wild time back in the early 2000s. So
Early internet days.
yeah, but the thing is, like this movie kind of, you mentioned all the stuff with like the Continental and stuff. They kind of played like a background role. They weren't really like, front and center. Like it's very much a John Wick, Keanu Reeves kind of centric movie. It's very simple. It kind of gets to the point. You have like the father, like I think he's like, I think I want to say it's like Tarasov or something like that. And he's like the big boss, whose son ended up being the one who like killed John Wick's dog, and like ultimately, he wanted John Wick to kind of drop it, but it's kind of one of those things where, it's like an impenetrable wall versus an unstoppable force, right? Like what's going to give in, and he kind of realized, well, shit, I have to protect my son, and do it. So they're kind of caught in a dance that they both know that, okay, like, yeah, this sucks, but this is the world we live in, and again, it kind of builds a lot of what the world of John Wick is, which kind of leads into John Wick Chapter 2, and yeah, this one is kind of more focused on the fact that, yeah, like a former associate of his, he kind of comes back into John's life after finding out that he's kind of active again. Even though John kind of adamantly says, "Well, I'm not active. This was just a one-time thing."
Mm-hmm.
But this guy basically, there's like another rule where it's like it's like a blood debt that he did. Like he kind of like the big job that John Wick did, that got him out of the game. This guy was involved in, and he needed to pay him back for what he did, and this is how, and this is the basis of the movie. I kind of felt this movie was a little bit weaker, or well, a lot weaker, to be honest. Not that it was bad. I think it has some pretty cool moments in it as well. You know what? What another thing these movies kind of remind me of. It kind of reminds me of like Hitman, but done in a way that's more interesting. Like the main character isn't like a blank slate. That's kind of what the main character in the Hitman series is supposed to be. He's kind of supposed to be this like very like a silent protagonist, which you're supposed to kind of put yourself on, right?
Yeah.
Whereas John Wick, he does have a character. He does have his own motives. And a lot of like the kind of scenarios kind of remind me a little bit about like those scenarios in the Hitman games. It's like, okay, you have to go into this
This opera, and
yeah,
you
and
have to
assassinate
take
this
out the
one
enemy,
guy.
like in the
Yeah, yeah,
heart of
yeah.
the whole thing.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of felt like, especially more so in Chapter 2, because they'd be like, oh, you have to go into this exclusive club area, and you have to assassinate this my sister or whatever it was, right? And it is like, and things go awry, but he obviously plans for it, and it all kind of escalates, and they go like back and forth into like different areas. They go to Italy and New York and stuff like that. But the thing is, I think ultimately, like the movie didn't feel as strong. I don't know if it's kind of, I don't know what the general consensus is for John Wick Chapter 2, but I kind of feel that it's a weaker film.
I feel
To
like
John Wick
most
1.
people like the first one more than the second one, but they're still very much rated like highly, in a sense where there's
Mhm.
it pretty much ramps it up. Like I feel like there's more, I guess, people who could be on John Wick's level, I think, in the second film, where it almost kind of feels like a video game almost, and it does the same thing with number 3, where it's if I remember correctly, there's like Ruby Rose's silent character in number 2, as well
Yep.
as like I forgot the agent following him, or the other assassin that was following him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There is another guy. Yeah.
yeah. So it almost feels kind of like a video game a little bit more about that one. And then
Yeah, like he has like all these other assassins trying to hunt him down because he has like eventually throughout the film he gets like a big a contract put on his head, and everybody wants to kill him. But I guess the other thing that's pretty cool about number two is it does a lot of world building within the Continental more, right? So you find out, oh, the Continental is like a big organization. It's not something that's like set only in New York City. It's like it's around the world. They have different kind of places in like Italy, and it's kind of cool because again, like John Wick kind of goes in to Italy and he has like a safe there, so he has money, he has like guns, he has all this kind of stuff that he's obviously prepared from his previous life in the chance that he might need it, kind of like how in the first film he kind of had that suitcase full of like those gold coins, right? And guns and stuff that he used in order to try and kill people. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff that's in it. I think like there has to be like a movie that eventually shows that big job he did, right? Like there's got to be a movie that's like they got to be moving towards that direction. Like, what is this big job that he did to get himself out of working for the Continental?
Well,
And
yeah,
that made him
I think,
untouchable.
yeah, they very much touch on it in the third one, where Haley Berry's character, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is kind of like heavily
Halle Berry, yeah.
Halle Berry's character is basically like helped him do that job, or
Mm-hmm.
something along those lines. Yeah, they kind of used to be friends, so I feel like it's touching up a little bit more on his past. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it looks like the John Wick train is just gonna keep on going, so get ready.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems to be the case, but it'd be cool if that's what it essentially almost kind of comes to. Like every movie that kind of comes out introduces like a character that helped him get out of the game, and maybe he has to recruit them, maybe he has to fight them. Maybe he has to do something with them, but then eventually you develop like a world within the John Wick world, and then you have like your Avengers movie, which is which is like you have Keanu Reeves and Harry Belly, and then you have I think it's Ricardo Sacamacchio. I think that's the guy who plays Santonio. So you have him. You have like all these previous villains or friends come together and do that film together, which I think kind of sounds like a really cool way to do it, to explain, oh, this is how John Wick got out of the game. But then it also shows like his relationship with his partner. Like maybe it's like he's like a totally different guy and I'll never find love. But then like he meets this girl and therefore he sets this plan in motion. So I think it'd be a cool way to do like a prequel within the John Wick world. And I really do need to watch part 3 or chapter 3 or whatever they call it. So yeah, I guess I'll leave that for the future. Hopefully I'll watch it somewhat soon.